It's the real news. I'm Ben Norton. The Green Party has come under attack as the Russiagate dragnet has expanded and is being used to attack leftist political opposition. Back in December, the Senate Intelligence Committee requested that the 2016 presidential campaign of Green Party candidate Jill Stein hand over its campaign documents. On Thursday, April 26th, Jill Stein publicly announced that she had complied with the request and had submitted emails and other campaign documents to the Senate Intelligence Committee. There is no evidence linking the Green Party to the Russian government. Jill Stein has come under attack because she did interviews on the Russian state media outlet RT and because she attended an RT event in Moscow. Despite this, media outlets have implied that the Green Party is part of an elaborate Kremlin conspiracy. Even liberal media outlets like MSNBC have given a platform to U.S. government officials, like the former U.S. ambassador to Russia, to smear the Green Party.
The margin that Jill Stein took in this election, if you were to work it backwards and you were a little conspiratorial, one might assume that it was enough to defeat Hillary Clinton, which was a good investment if the Russians were involved in that.
Well, yeah, let's be careful. We don't know exactly why people voted for whom, and it's very difficult to measure causality here. But two things are very obvious, that she took votes away from somebody, and most likely those voters were from Hillary Clinton. And two, there's a likelihood that she suppressed voter turnout for Secretary Clinton. So even if they didn't vote for her, those that supported those ideas and were less likely to vote for her because she was trumpeting issues and positions that were anti-Clinton.
That was the former U.S. ambassador to Russia speaking on MSNBC. And what's funny about that segment is the host admits it's conspiratorial. But joining us to discuss this alleged conspiracy is Jill Stein herself. Jill is a physician and a longtime activist. She ran for president on the Green Party ticket in both 2012 and 2016. Thanks for joining us here at The Real News, Jill.
Great to be with you, Ben.
So could you respond to all of this, please? Why is the Senate Intelligence Committee going after you and the Green Party?
Well, there you had it, sort of the usual, shall we say, the arrogance of the Democratic Party establishment, assuming that votes belong to Hillary Clinton. And if there was another candidate who got votes, they had to be taken away from somebody, as if our votes belong to the two establishment parties, which actually a majority of voters and a growing majority of voters are saying, are not serving us. They're not serving we the people. People are clamoring for other options. And also, let's look at the facts. There were exit polls that showed that people who voted for me, by and large, would not have come out to vote if they hadn't had me or a Green Party candidate to vote for. It was like over 60% of people who voted for me would not have otherwise voted. And remember, already there were like 45% of American voters who were not voting. There were 75% of American voters who were screaming for other options, who wanted open debates so that they could find out who else they could vote for. And last but not least, the majority of people who voted for Donald Trump were not for Donald Trump. They were voting against the other option. It is preposterous for the naysayers to keep pretending that they own our votes and to keep pretending that there's no solution here and to blame the options, the other candidates that people are clamoring for. They could just change the voting system, as the state of Maine is trying to do against the will of the Democratic and Republican parties. But there is a fix here. I won't spend a lot of time, but just to acknowledge that this is so off target and mean-spirited to keep trying to drive away political resistance and blaming the choices that people are clamoring for. Instead, we could change to a ranked choice voting system that lets people rank their choices, so you know that if your first choice loses, your vote's automatically reassigned to your second choice. There doesn't have to be any question about splitting the vote or taking votes away or unintended consequences or having to vote your fears, because the politics of fear has actually brought us everything we were afraid of. So bottom line, that's just preposterous what the former ambassador, whoever that was saying, I couldn't see the film to know who that was. I couldn't see the video. But that's just like ridiculous, and is more of this nonsense that we continue to get from the Democratic National Committee. The latest example being their lawsuit here, which again tries to divert attention from the critical issues that people are fighting right now. As Norman Solomon said in his recent piece, instead of fighting Wall Street, they're fighting WikiLeaks. They're not only fighting WikiLeaks, they're fighting dissent in general, and they are warmongering and censoring and trying to silence political opposition. This is more of the same.
Yeah, and what do you say to critics who say that you went to Moscow for this RT Gala? Of course, thousands of people go on RT to do interviews pretty regularly, and before 2 years ago, that was not seen as anything unusual. But what do you say to the Democrats who say, well, you are in this photo sitting next to Vladimir Putin, and then therefore this is proof that you're part of some elaborate Kremlin conspiracy?
So that was all public knowledge. There was nothing untoward. There was nothing secret. There were no backroom deals. It's been explained a million times, and it was actually explained in real time, where it was clear that we were fundraising in order to do this. I was going to deliver a message basically supporting peace and diplomacy. I actually criticized the Russians when I was there for their new bombing campaign in Syria. They had just entered into that war, and I said in no uncertain terms that they were following in the footsteps of a failed catastrophic US policy. People may disagree with that opinion, and I know that's, there are a lot of opinions about that, but I was hardly going to make backroom deals. There was no question about money changing hands. Unlike most of the people who've been dragged into the investigation, I received not a penny, made no backroom deals, no quid pro quo, nothing of the sort. In fact, I was offered support for transportation and hotel and all that, which I declined. Not only did I not get a fee, I didn't even get reimbursement for it. I was there to promote our policy, the same policy that I was advancing throughout the election. And that's a policy that the American people are actually really interested in hearing. It's about how we could have a foreign policy based on international law, human rights, and diplomacy, instead of on economic and military domination, how we can come to grips with this nuclear crisis, which is really exploding in many places around the world, which the US and Russia, but particularly the US, in withdrawing from the anti-ballistic missile treaty, a couple decades ago under George Bush, things have been unraveling ever since. We're not in a good way. We need to be talking to each other. And there are many Americans right now who are not happy whatsoever with this endless state of war that has cost us over $5 trillion since 9/11, which is growing by leaps and bounds, which now occupies 57% of our discretionary budget. The next biggest expenditure of funds that Congress has control over, you go from 57%, number two is like 7%. So it's absolutely, we have a military budget with a few pieces of window dressing around it. And it has huge consequences for what this means for us here at home, for housing, for education, for bailing out students, which we should be doing for the cost of our nuclear weapons program, begun under Obama, but which is obviously continuing under Donald Trump. It's $1.5 trillion for a new generation of nuclear weapons, which is absolutely suicidal and is part of this arms race that we're also engaged in. So we're kind of reaching the end of the road right now with this militarization of our economy, of our foreign policy, and of society in general, with terrible consequences at home for our democracy. And the issues I was putting on the table throughout the campaign were the same issues that I was putting on the table in my efforts to speak to the media, to a broad international audience, to leadership and everyday people, activists in Russia, as well as China, as well as Jeremy Corbyn, who were all people that I had an opportunity to talk with as a part of that trip. It wasn't just to Moscow, it was also to the Paris Climate Accords, where I had the opportunity to share these policies with a whole lot of people, also including the deputy lead climate negotiator from China. So there were a variety of officials who were very interested in this other point of view that we don't get to hear from. How many polls have we seen lately about where the American people stand? You know, they did a poll in the UK just before the airstrikes by the UK, the US, and France. You may know about this, Ben, but you know, many people out there don't, because this kind of information, shall we say, is not being propagated. Support for that kind of aggressive policy was running 22% in the UK, and there have been no polls that I've been able to find, you know, establishing what it is in the US, where people are even denied the opportunity to hear another point of view.
Well, we're going to have to end one of our discussion here with Jill Stein, and please join us at The Real News for part 2, in which we will continue discussing Russiagate, the Senate Intelligence Committee's investigation, and the overall talking point of interference in the U.S. election and what other actors are interfering in the U.S. election. Thanks for joining us, Jill.
Thank you.